speaker we will be hearing from is Mr. Scott Tasker, General Manager, Aeronautical Commercial from Auckland Airport. Mr. Tasker has more than 20 years of experience in the travel industry, both in New Zealand and the United Kingdom, and over this period has held a number of leadership roles as well. In his current role, he's focused on sustainable growth of airline capacity, improving route connectivity, and increasing passenger volumes. Please welcome Mr. Scott Tasker.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, kia ora koutou, namaste and good morning. My name is Scott Tasker and I am responsible for air service development, airline, travel and tourism partnerships at Auckland Airport. And yes, we are working on that direct service between New Zealand and India. No pressure. In essence, my role and the role of my team is to get more passengers through Auckland Airport so that the positive growth effects of increased passengers through our company and out into New Zealand's tourism industry benefit the economy. Also, we need to ensure that the airlines that are operating routes to and from New Zealand are sustainable and profitable in the long run. Today I'm going to take you through a presentation that will focus firstly on wider passenger market trends and why we feel positive in general about the prospects for growth here in New Zealand. Secondly, I'm going to touch specifically on why we see passenger market potential between New Zealand and India being very positive, and what our high-level strategy is to unlock capacity and connectivity between the two countries to facilitate both people-to-people and trade opportunities. Firstly, a quick update on how the development of the aviation network touching Auckland Airport is tracking. So since July, around about mid-2016, we've had a lot of growth. We've had 7 new airlines and 14 new routes commence operations or be announced, which alongside the capacity added by existing airlines has delivered something like a 16% increase in seats to from Auckland Airport. We've seen new air services turn up from around the Pacific Rim and beyond to the Middle East as well. And this has been really important because this has unlocked capacity to grow inbound visitor demand and provide greater choice and competition for New Zealanders. If we just sort of look around the Pacific Rim, looking at the Americas first, we've seen United and American Airlines return to New Zealand after an absence of almost 20 years, in the case of United. Air New Zealand going further into the US, kicking off services to Chicago shortly. Looking at China, amazing. We now have 6 airlines, 7 routes between Auckland and China. And we've got great services into both Tier 1 cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou and Shenzhen. But also we now have connectivity direct into the emerging second-tier cities, places like Chongqing, Chengdu. Which is really important to sort of capture that next wave of growth out of China. In North Asia, outside of mainland China, we've seen new services into Hong Kong from Hong Kong Airlines, which has actually provided really good connectivity through to India with their partnerships with Air India and Jet Airways. Air New Zealand also growing in Japan and shortly kicking off services to Taiwan. In Southeast Asia, Air New Zealand, Singapore Airlines, very pleased at the end of October, within their joint venture structure, they'll add a 3rd daily flight into Singapore. And in combination with the growth that Singapore Airlines is doing between Singapore and India, that is going to provide significant new capacity for connectivity between New Zealand and the subcontinent, but also through to Europe and Southeast Asia. Thai Airways have also grown out to a daily service on the Auckland-Bangkok route, which again is another popular way to get through to India. Philippine Airlines now operating direct between Auckland and Manila and providing great connectivity through to Cebu, actually. So that's a good sort of enhancement also. We've also seen direct services commence between Auckland and the Middle East. So those Middle Eastern hubs at Doha and Dubai handling a lot of passenger traffic through to UK, Europe, but a little bit of traffic through to India as well. So this enhancement into the network serving Auckland has been really important. It's provided a catch-up to get our isolated country more connected into the Pacific Rim, into those important hub airports where passengers can flow into the large tourism source markets. And also, for New Zealanders, competition and choice has been a good thing, and that has stimulated outbound travel from the country also. So the growing capacity and connectivity between New Zealand and South Asia, North Asia and the Middle East has definitely assisted in growing our inbound tourism markets. What clearly remains a gap is direct connectivity between New Zealand and India. So just looking now at the global picture, it's really interesting. This graph was sourced from Airbus, and what it shows is from the 1970s onwards, despite the various geopolitical, economic, terrorism and health scares and other shocks, global air travel has continued to grow unabated. And in fact, passenger traffic globally has roughly doubled since September 11. You'll remember the World Trade Center attacks. And actually since the GFC, global passenger traffic has increased by 60%. And here in New Zealand, our passenger growth profile is roughly equivalent to that, which is very positive. So really the challenge for us here in New Zealand, and probably in India and other places, is to ensure that we get our share of that growth in new airline seat capacity once it comes to market. And the Asia Pacific region has been a very large part of the growth story since the GFC, driven a lot by China. The massive growth in outbound international and domestic travel within China. And I think a big question for us is, will India provide that next wave of growth in the 2020s? It kind of looks like it will. And I think we heard an earlier speaker reference the number of new aircraft being delivered into the airline fleets in India. So that's a good forward indicator, I believe. There's no doubt that the airline capacity growth that we've seen in Auckland and our other New Zealand airports has been strong catch-up over the last, kind of 3 years or so. So why are we continuing to attract new capacity, and do we feel positive about our future chances of doing so? Well, yes, we do feel positive. New Zealand continues to be underserved with airline seats versus the demand to visit our country. And this is a very positive indicator for airlines when they're thinking about adding seats. Aircraft technology advancements, the current generation of aircraft, the 787 and the A350, are significantly more fuel efficient than the aircraft they replaced, around 15 to 20%. And that is really important for airlines when they're considering launching high-risk, long-haul routes on thin markets like those to New Zealand. So that has been a big part of it. The fuel price, over the previous 3 years, was significantly reduced versus the fuel price that was around in the last peak in 2011 to 14. Yes, it is creeping up, but it is still 40% lower than it was in 2014. But we do need to watch it, because with fuel price coming up, airlines will be more risk adverse in launching new routes, and we are starting to see airlines talking about putting up ticket prices. New Zealand is highly attractive to visitor markets. Tourism New Zealand undertakes some research called Active Considerer, which sizes up the number of people globally that want to come to New Zealand, have New Zealand high on their bucket list at about 118 million people. So a lot of people want to come here to experience the beauty of our country. It's isolated, it's safe, and also our unique culture, which is great. And airlines can see that their customers want to come here. There's literally a wall of new aircraft being delivered into global fleets. The global airline fleet will increase from something like 22,000 aircraft in 2015 to around 45,000 aircraft in 2035. So it's really critical for us here in New Zealand that we get our share of that new capacity as it comes online. We're really fortunate in New Zealand that in general we have very open sky air service agreements with most other countries. Although I should comment that I think our air service agreement currently in force between New Zealand and India could be improved. It could become a more high quality agreement that would allow a little bit more flexibility in how airlines could serve the two countries. And actually, it's easier to start a new route to New Zealand than many other places. We have a developed airline and aviation infrastructure, which really helps as well. So now moving on to have a look at the Indian market in specifically. We feel very positive that passenger markets between New Zealand and India will grow positively. Indian visitors to New Zealand are highly valued. They come to New Zealand across more of the year. They visit New Zealand in the shoulder periods between April and June. And they're a great market to drive visitor growth and productivity in our tourism industry in the off-peak period. And referring back to that active considerer research again, around 14 million Indians have New Zealand quite high on their bucket list of destinations to visit, so that's a good thing. And we've been doing pretty well. Total outbound Indian travel has been growing at around 10% CAGR over the last 10 years. New Zealand's been getting double that growth. And actually outbound from New Zealand to India, growing very strongly as well, around about a 30% CAGR over the last 10 years, versus 14% for the total New Zealand outbound. So there's around about 145,000 movements between New Zealand and India each year. And if you look at that on a per day basis, that's about 370 passengers per day each way. That's more than enough to fill a 777 every day. So the market exists, the market is growing, and I can assure you that we are having discussions with airlines around that. Indian outbound travel, of course, is going to grow, off the back of a growing middle class, strong GDP growth, improved air connectivity, and investment in the Indian airport and airline industry. So given that we currently have no direct services between New Zealand and India, that entire market of 370 passengers per day each way is currently squeezing through a number of routings through the various Asia-Pacific airline hubs, as is shown on this slide. Singapore remains the most popular place for people to travel through, about 45% of the market flying up through Changi, followed by Kuala Lumpur with about a 16% share, followed by Hong Kong, Bangkok, and increasingly Guangzhou with China Southern. And surprisingly, passengers are even backtracking through Dubai. It's a 15-hour flight from Dubai to New Zealand, but people are doing that in order to get access to a seat at certain times of the year. And passengers travelling through these Asia-Pacific hubs are competing for seats with a lot of other passenger flows. So people to Europe, people to Southeast Asia and North Asia are travelling through Singapore, Hong Kong and Bangkok also. So that's why it means that at certain times a year, seats to India are quite expensive or they're quite rare, hard to get. So how do we continue to unlock seat capacity? How do we get that connectivity that we need in order to facilitate and enable trade and connectivity between the two countries? From an Auckland Airport perspective, we've got two key focus areas for the Indian market to unlock growth. Firstly, we are working on seat capacity development. We're keen to see our airline partners grow both indirect capacity through those Asian hubs in order to grow the market. But also, we're pretty keen to see that direct, dedicated airline capacity between New Zealand and India. Which, similar to the China story before it, will definitely be the factor that will significantly unlock the market. It will bring in increased tourism numbers, but it will provide also, below the floor of the aircraft, that belly hold space for high-value exports. So we're working on that, as are a number of other people. It's not going to be an overnight fix, whether it's indirect or direct air services, and ultimately it depends on the strength of the opportunity for the airlines to launch flights to New Zealand versus the plethora of other opportunities they have. Ultimately, an aircraft is a mobile piece of capital equipment. An airline is going to deploy it to the place that is going to make them the most profit, and that's fair enough. It is a good opportunity and we have a good story, so we'll keep knocking on doors and making sure that's the case. And I think there's a few people here today that I'll be hunting down, actually. As I finish up, it has been a period of significant growth at Auckland Airport over the last few years, and the Indian market has been a significant feature of that. We see passenger and trade flows between New Zealand and India as a key growth opportunity for the future, and we're certainly focused on playing our role around the development of capacity between the two countries to unlock this for the future. Thank you very much.